Hello and good evening. Today I'm going to be sharing my article for EDBL 505. My article is Elementary ESOL and Content Teachers Resilient Co-Teaching Practices, a Long-Term Analysis, presented by myself, Julie and Kona Shepherd. This is fall. Today is 11/28/2024. And here we go. In the article that I read, it was on co-teaching practices as they are applied in the, um, excuse me, as they're applied with ELL students. This is the citation and the abstract. It's by Clara Bauler and Emily King are the writers of the article. And of course the abstract and the link here to find the actual article, the PDF itself. New York State, this is based on a study done in the state of New York after they adopted regulations that mandated collaboration among ESOL and content teachers in integrated periods with ELLs in the mainstream classroom. This is their research and how it looked like in co-teaching. So co-teaching is usually used as an inclusion model for students with disabilities. It is a push-in model, generally can take different forms where the specialist pushes into the classroom during the regular teaching time and works with the content teacher during a specific lesson, usually to work with students to meet their hours of need. Typically, the model with ELL students is ELLs are pulled out of the classroom and usually they take them to a separate room where they work on a separate content model. Usually WIDA is a national standard. Co-teaching, however, would include ELL students in the classroom and the content team teaching with the ESOL teacher during the mainstream time. So the students and the ELL students would not be pulled out for that extra time. Now, the caveat, according to this research, is that successful implementation of co-teaching continues to be problematic around the globe. The team did look at different models and different studies that were done in Australia and other parts of Europe and Asia to see if they could find some information related for best practices related to co-teaching for ELL students in the classroom. And what they found was it continues to be a struggle. So the research questions that they explored for their research. So what trends emerged in co-teaching practices? What problems affected implementing in the co-teaching into the classroom and how? And then they used as a basis for how they recorded students their state scores as the standard in which they gauged whether or not students were learning based on the new model of co-teaching. Excuse me. These are some different co-teaching strategies. So in the article, they weren't specific about them, but these are the 5 to 6 standard accepted co-teaching strategy. There's not one, there's different. So over here, we have the one that most people go with is one teacher teaches, the other one drifts during the teacher. Then we have a team teaching model where both teachers are teaching at the same time and taking turns back and forth. We have parallel teaching where you have the students turn. See, there's a split here. and some are over here with this teacher during the time, and some are over here. And then a lot of times they switch with parallel. We have alternative teaching, where there's a main class session going on and then a group session going on here. And then we have just the one teach and one just observing during the teaching time. This would be more like what you see going on during student teaching. And this is the last one that's sometimes used, where you have two group teaching sessions where the teachers are actively engaged, usually with students who need that more support. And then the separate group who is doing the same lesson, but just working among peers. Over here, they go through the specifics of what these are. So these are the different models that are generally used throughout the practice of co-teaching. Now, it's interesting to say in the research, what they did not say is whether or not the state of New York, when they implemented the curriculum for co-teaching, if they required a specific model or frankly, any specifics related to how the co-teaching was supposed to work, how it was supposed to be facilitated. They did not go through that in their research. So that is an unknown in this research. Now, the positive side attributes of co-teaching in the classroom, when co-teaching is working, you get a really rich collaboration and really strong curriculum when both teachers are working together. So when you have, that they're taking the time to make the lessons meet the students' needs. There's goal setting going on for the ESOL students in the classroom. There's structured assessments that go on with the ESL class students, because the ESOL teacher, they know how to make the assessments to meet the students' needs based on what the teacher's trying to teach in the curriculum, rather than them just having to guess otherwise if they're not in the classroom. The structured push-ins, so this means that the ESOL teachers in the classroom, a better way to, or an easier way to differentiate the instruction. Again, this is the opportunity for the teacher to see and actually help the students while this is going on, rather than wait till afterwards to figure out what happened. Coordinating the instruction. Again, this connects with the collaboration part of it, to where the ESOL teacher isn't guessing on what the students need to learn later. They can actively coordinate during the collaboration when it's going on. One thing is the gain in social emotional learning. So if students aren't being pulled out of the classroom, this is something with special ed students that they have a lot of data on, but it's the same with ESL students. They are more engaged in the learning and more engaged in the class, because they're not being pulled out for those special sessions, all those minutes that they need to meet in order to meet the standards for the language standards. And then shared interest by content and teachers. So what they find is sometimes when this collaboration is happening, the content teacher, the classroom teacher, is just as excited about working with the students and being able to help them, and they build this kind of shared interest together to make the classroom better. And ultimately, what happens is it's not just that the ELL students have a better experience, but all the students in the class, because now you have two certificated teachers in the classroom who can help support all the students in one way or another, depending on the model that's being used. The negative attributes of co-teaching, of course, there's negatives to everything. ESL teachers, they're not in their expertise content. A lot of ELL teachers, they go into and get their credential in ESOL, but maybe they have a background in social studies, or maybe they have a background in English. Depending on what their background is, now they're in a position to where they're teaching in all content areas that might not be their strong point. And they're moving around. It's not just all content areas. It's jumping all day long through all the content areas in different grades. So it becomes difficult for those teachers to actually support students because they're doing so much curriculum. There's a lack of use of the native language of the students. Usually, if the teachers don't know the languages, then they can't really use them in the classroom. And it's not just about hiring somebody for who, say, speaks Chinese, because there might not just be Chinese students in your classroom. There's a plethora of students with this possibility of a plethora of students, different languages. Um, and then there's no, as I mentioned earlier, there's no clear framework that New York did. And for co-teaching, as I pointed out earlier, there's different models. And you can't use a fits all model. So those things come into play. The other things, the big parts is that usually the classroom teacher and the ESL teacher don't have shared power. And so the ESOL teacher is treated more like an aide in the classroom as opposed to a teacher, and there's not a balance within how they teach together. And then, of course, the lack of time and space for them to work together and collaborate. So the impact on ESL teachers is large because of this. They feel marginalized, they're reduced, they're treated like an aide or a tutor in the class. Um, their students, the ELL students, don't know how to take this because they don't know how to see this other teacher. They lose that there's a loss of professional identity. They're certificated teachers as well, but that's not how they're viewed when they're often in the co-teaching model. And sometimes there's a lack of collaboration. ESOL teachers provide support to many students in many classes, and having to work and create those lessons with all those teachers is time consuming, and that lack of collaboration time shows that they're not really working together. So it's a big deal for ESOL teachers. So the disconnect in understanding as it relates to how co-teaching works, that's a problem, because everybody has a different idea often of what co-teaching is. And without a solid model that's handed down, people are going to take their perceptions of it and roll with it. A lot of times teachers are too overwhelmed to have to figure out what district is telling them to do. So it turns into them. So the typical thing that content teachers or the classroom teachers think is that the ESOL teacher is to just teach them vocabulary as it relates to the curriculum. And the classroom teacher is teaching the main content, and that's how it's viewed, to where often that ESOL teacher is viewed as more as an aide in the classroom. There's usually a lack of principal and administrative support. Again, if this isn't like being supported from all sides, then it's just not being done right. The lack of collaboration time. So all the all the classroom teachers doing the content planning. Master scheduling problems. This is a problem for everyone in every situation in a school, is trying to place classes with, divvy them up into all the specialist times in that, throughout the day to make it work. So it definitely affects the ESOL's teachers' ability to do their job. the curriculum constraints, that's curriculum of what all the teachers are required to use. And they have to do it. And if it's not in there, and they don't have time for it, then that's what it is. And then perception on time. That's a real big one, is whether or not there's a problem um, or enough time to do the proper collaboration in order to make co-teaching work the way it needs to. So what they found in the study was it was apparent there was no right co-teaching model. What seemed to work was more organic types of structures based on the co-teacher's ability to share and implement ideas together. With limited co-planning time, teams of co-teachers developed resilient practices. So this kind of goes back to there's no main model that was in being used in New York. So teachers kind of had to use what they did. And what they found is of the 6 models, it depended on what was being taught, on what model they would use. They couldn't just pick one of those 6 models and just go with it. It had to change. It couldn't just be with one. So the core practices of co-teaching, based on the research. Subject matter focus. Subject matter where students are during time in which students purposefully practice reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So they found during times like ELL or social studies or writers' workshops were the better times for ESOL teachers to do the co-teaching, because the students were already practicing those things they needed to. And then intentional and consistent assignment of the subject areas to ESL teachers. If there were enough of them in the building, you can have one assigned to ELL content, one assigned to social studies content, one assigned to writing content, and work that way so that they could be moved around, or those 3 content areas being the biggest focus was where the ESL teachers were put in. They weren't put in during science or math necessarily, because they weren't focusing on those core parts that they need to. It's not to say they didn't use them at all in those areas. It was just less likely to be needed. Equality in roles. So this is how the ESOL teachers use during the co-teaching time, that they're shared planning, they're collaborating together. It's not just the ESOL teacher being used as an aid in the classroom during the time they're in the class in that push-in time. The full inclusion of ELL students. So the models needed to change based on the lessons. There was an increase in small group activities. There was more student peer collaboration, so they were able to talk to each other using the academic terminology during the lessons. And what they found while they were observing some of this is that they couldn't tell the difference when it was working between the ELL students and the non-ELL students, because they flowed together so well during the class time. So the outcomes, what they saw, observable increase in the fluidity of student-teacher engagements for support and learning of all students in the classroom. When co-teaching is working, when there's collaboration, and there's support from the administration, the classroom just worked better. The students were engaged, they were learning, they saw increases in the students' ability, more so than in other areas. Um, However, what they did also identify, there were 5 barriers that kept coming back. And this was based on surveys that they did with the teachers, and what they kept saying and what they observed as well. So they didn't have enough planning time with the classroom teacher and the ESOL teacher. The ESOL teacher, again, they have so many students in so many different classrooms in so many different subjects. If the master calendar isn't working, they're moved everywhere and they just cannot collaborate as well. And so that moves into the curricular constraints, as well as the pacing, imposed by the district. So where students have to be at benchmarks throughout the school year. So where students are by November, where they are by January, by March, things like that. It doesn't necessarily work with the planning for students who are in ELL supports. There's difference in teaching styles. Not every teacher works well together. So finding the teachers that can do the collaborations well, that's important. And then what the roles are of in the classroom, going back to what models what works, and that is only developed with teachers having enough ability to collaborate together and figure out what their roles are and how they're going to work together. Despite the barriers, they found in the study over a 3-year period ways where co-teaching could work and could succeed. They found that it is plausible with the adequate planning time and administrative support, and that the models need to be always changed up. You can't just settle on one model. It needs to move and it needs to change. And that rich collaboration time is necessary, or else the co-teaching model doesn't work. As well as focusing on specific content area, again, making sure that the ESOL teachers are using those periods of like social studies, English, and writing times when all those modalities they need are going to be expected to be used, like academic talk, and just being able to talk in the classroom and ask questions and engage in the classroom during the teaching time when the teacher, is asking them to, because otherwise they're not engaging. What I found, I was curious, I had questions after reading the research, is when the teachers talked about the models not working, is did the teachers who struggled with the co-teaching try different models, or did they just do like one and done, like this isn't working for me? There was no research to answer that question for myself. And then what other considerations did they observe for the groups of ELL students in levels 1 and 3? So I go back, and I didn't talk about this much because they based it on testing, and you can't base everything on testing. They noticed that co-teaching supported students more who were in levels 3 to 5 than they did for students who were in 1 to 3. They actually saw declines for using the co-teaching models for the students with lower language levels compared to the students with the higher language levels. So I would love to see more research around how they look at that meaning itself, because I thought that was important that there was such a difference in test and how the students responded to co-teaching based on the level that they were in. But again, that wasn't explored in the research itself that I've read. So the questions I have for you guys today, what are your thoughts about using co-teaching in your own classroom? What was a positive outcome that makes you want to learn more about co-teaching? What did you take away from hearing about the positive and negatives outcomes of co-teaching? And does your school or school district use any co-teaching that you know of? Thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the video and the presentation today. Now,